What's up, everybody? This is Dan with Dan and Sarah Makers, and today we are out in this shop. Yeah, that. So today I'm going to show you a little bit different video from what we've done before. I'm going to kind of give you a run through on how to solder copper pipe with regular solder, and then also to do a silver solder. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick for, well, an expensive trick on how to tie into a pipe that might have a lot of water in it, something to look for at least. And then also I'm going to show you how to desolder a fitting in case you have absolutely no other option but to take a fitting apart to tie in something new or make a repair. So anyways, I hope you enjoy it. First time I've filmed out here, so we'll give it a try. Let's get started. So I'm going to show you this particular way of soldering up a pipe. Got my tubing cutter. I've already got this end deburred and cleaned. And say we're going to put a 90 on here. So I'll cut the tubing. Say this is embedded in the wall or something, and that's where I want the pipe, but I need to put the 90 here. I'll use my tubing cutter. There are now power cutters that will latch onto the pipe and cut this automatically. Unless you're doing a lot of work, that isn't really required. Again, my deburring tool, I'll stick it in there. Run it around. Make sure you don't have any coiled up copper burrs down in there. That'll be a problem later on. I'm going to use my emery cloth. Going to clean my section of pipe here. And then set that aside. Then I've got another deburring tool. This is made by General. And this is basically identical, the same exact head as on my tubing cutter. And I can use this if I need to instead of the tubing cutter. Again, make sure you don't have any burrs still. It's a little bit of a burr there still. A little bit harder. That's pretty good. And then again with the emery cloth, clean that up. So now I have a 90-degree fitting, and it's got oxidation, corrosion, whatever on the inside of the fitting. So I need to clean that off. I've got one of these little combination tools. I don't really see the need for these outside pipe cleaners because using that emery cloth is a lot faster and easier. But these brushes here are really nice. And so you just stick that in there, twist it around a little bit, kind of check to make sure you've got it all scuffed up and cleaned. The surface oxidation is off of there. Do both sides. Looks pretty good. They also make similar brushes like this where it's just a hand. This is a 1/2 inch, but same thing. You just stick it in and twist it. So now I'm going to put paste flux on, and this is specifically for plumbing pipes, potable water. I always flux my fittings first because I can lay a fitting down and not get anything stuck into the flux that's on there. So I do my fittings first. This has been outside and it's been pretty cold out, so I got to kind of smear it around. So just get that flux in there. Just kind of wipe down all the surfaces. And one thing that I was taught when I was starting out in plumbing was a little rhyme or saying that the flux or the solder flows where the flux goes. So if you want solder to go somewhere, you need to put flux on it. So again, you don't need a lot of it. This is an acid-based flux, which means that the acid is eating into the copper pipe just a little bit, which makes it critical to clean off when you're done. Flush the lines out thoroughly and wipe the flux, which will turn black when you solder it. Clean that off the outside of the pipe, because I've gone into new homes where the plumbers didn't care and they didn't do a good job cleaning the pipes after they soldered. And I think the record was in one new home that was only a couple years old, we had 14 different leaks or service calls that we had to go to cut out bad fittings that had corroded through and leaked. So it is important to get that flux off and cleaned up. So just enough to kind of put a tint of flux on there. So with this, you just stick the fitting in. It's pretty loose. It's not like a PVC pipe or ABS pipe where it's an interference fit. But one thing you'll commonly run into with 90s, whether they're going down or horizontal or at some angle, is as you heat it up, there tends to be a tendency for the pipe to twist and gravity takes it, or the pipe to fall out. In this situation, we'll solder it, let's say like that. That way it's easiest to see. Actually, no, let's do it this way so you can actually see the flux and solder or solder flow on this side. As I heat it up, it'll want to twist. So one trick is to get a pair of channel locks. And you're not going to try and destroy this fitting, but you want to crimp it down just enough to deform it. So a little bit tighter. See, it just wants to twist there. So I'm just going to take it, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a squeeze, and that made it a whole lot stiffer, and I'm not going to have to worry about that pipe spinning around once it's hot. So I've got solder. There are many different brands. They're all pretty much uniform or universal. The only thing is, make sure you have plumbing solder for potable water. It has that NSF tag on there, and it will say potable, contains no lead, things like that. If you get electrical solder for arts and crafts type things, that will have lead in it, and obviously we don't want that. I like to put a little hook in my solder, and I like to give myself plenty of length on there. So I'm going to be using a Burns-O-Matic auto lighting torch, and this is a MAP gas torch. It's got a yellow tank. It's got a, I think it's acetylene and propane, so it's a mix. So it's much hotter than propane. It gets a lot hotter. So I'll go ahead and turn my torch on. And I guess before I start doing that, we apply heat to the fitting. We don't apply heat to the pipe itself. And don't solder one side and then expect to come back and do the other side later. You'll burn that flux out of there, and you'll have a horrible time trying to do it. So do both sides of a fitting at the same time. If you need to, stub in a piece and put a coupling on later if for some reason you think you can't keep going. So here we go. And that's it. So I don't put so much solder on there that I get a huge bead on the underside. I will commonly check the underside. If I have a big drip formed up, I'll just take the end of my solder here. I'll just kind of give it a little wipe. If you can see, it's still flowing a little bit, and it is sucking into the fitting just a little bit there. But we'll let it cool down, and if I've got time, if I'm not worried about heat, if I'm not worried about wood and things like that around it, I'll let it cool down by itself for a while. If not, get yourself a sprayer. This one, these Spray Masters are really good. They have enough power to really kind of get out there and knock down a fire in case you do light something on fire by accident. Hopefully you don't, but a lot of plumbers, they seem to not care if they're blasting wood with the flame. So, one thing that you can do to start cooling down is, I've got a rag here, and I'm just going to kind of start soaking my rag. I think there might be a little bit of simple green in this too. But as I kind of wipe my rag up to the fitting, you'll hear it starting to hiss here. And you can burn yourself with steam on these here. But make sure you get around this fitting and get all that black residue from the flux off. That's really important. Like I said, you'll be redoing things and there'll be leaks in the wall if you don't clean that off. So that's what you get there. One tool that's really handy to have, especially when you're plumbing, is this isn't quite a dentist mirror, but it's very similar to it. It's all metal, so automotive mirror. This and a flashlight are really handy because when you're tight in somewhere and you don't have real good visibility and you want to make sure, especially on an iffy fitting, you can look around your fitting with this and see that you have solder all the way around and it looks good. You'll get to know what it looks like if you've got a bad solder joint. There'll be little black pits where it's really hard to get that flux out of there, that residue. So to me, that looks like a good fitting right there. So the second method that I'm going to show you here is pretty uncommon for doing plumbing pipes, but it sometimes happens. But basically, I'm going to show you how to silver solder, which is using a rod like this, and we're going to connect up. I cut the previous fitting off that we use regular flux on, or solder on, and we're going to solder on another 90. But this time, let's see, we'll do it in a vertical position. Again, we have the issue with it potentially rolling around on us like that. So we'll give it a little bit of a crank. But on this particular situation with silver solder, we don't use any flux. So this is actually considered welding, and we've got to get this fitting way hotter than the previous time. So it'll get orange hot. And it is welding, so you want to be careful about ultraviolet light. So properly tinted lenses are good to have, and then also fumes and things like that. But the benefit is that you don't have any of that acid-based flux where you can potentially corrode later on. So we'll get started. All right, so as you can see, it took a lot longer to heat that pipe up, or tubing, and you basically have to get it to the point where you could potentially melt the copper pipe. If you're not careful, you can burn holes through it, but you're getting this rod up hot enough to melt. So you can see it's hot back to here to where it's sizzling a little bit. Not too bad over here. I would assume that the vise here probably acted a little bit as a heat sink. So that is silver soldering. A little bit uglier. You see this a lot in HVAC systems, but it turns everything kind of black and oxidized. So that's one way of doing it. So clean it up a little bit, make it look really exciting. And as I said, you can easily burn yourself with the steam coming through your rag if you're not careful. So I know when I plumbed a lot, I could handle heat on my hands a lot better than I do now. I'm more used to it, I guess. So yeah, so that's a standard solder joint and a silver solder joint. So sometimes, no matter what you do in a situation, there's a fitting there, you don't have enough pipe or room to cut a fitting out and then add on new, and so you've got to desolder something. This happens a lot with valves and things that are in place in the wall that you can't remove. So I'm going to show you, we're going to take this 90 off by desoldering it. So what we are going to need is our torch, a pair of channel locks, and then what helps to clean up and get the bulk of the solder off the fitting, because as it comes off, this whole fitting or this length of pipe here is going to have a nice layer of solder on it, which will need to be cleaned off before you can think about putting a new fitting on. So we'll fire up the torch, get some heat on it. That's all it takes. Now, as one word of advice, if there is water in the line, it's going to take a lot longer to get it heated up enough to desolder. So that's a little bit of a challenge. And then one thing that I omitted is I like to heat from the bottom typically, because heat does rise. But one thing you have to look out for is if a drop of solder comes off the bottom of this pipe and drops down into the end of your torch, that will mess your torch up, and your torch won't work right from then on out, and you'll have to replace this piece. The flame doesn't get hot enough back here to melt that solder. So make sure that you don't put your torch in a position where solder can actually drip down into it. Now, as I said, we've got this nice layer of solder on the whole pipe end, and so I just like to very gently go around this pipe end with a file until I just start seeing a little bit of copper showing through. And that tells me that I've gotten down far enough that I can finish it off with some sandpaper or emery cloth and get that to where I can clean it and solder on a new fitting.